Giving Pittsburgh a better alternative. Giving Pittsburgh.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Pittsburgh Current podcast, coming to you live from the beautiful Beachview Business District from Sorgatron Media here on Broadway Avenue. We've got a good show today, really good show today. We'll get to that in a second, but first I want to tell you that the new issue of the Pittsburgh Current is out this week. It's on stands right now. We've got the Motown legend Smokey Robinson is on the cover. You can't miss that. We've actually had a busy Smokey Robinson. It's been a Smokey Robinson week at the Pittsburgh Current. He was in 2 days ago for a live interview, which you can catch with Jim Krenn Monday at noon. That will debut. It was a really, really great interview. I think Smokey even told some stories that he hadn't told before publicly. So you want to check that out for sure. Also, speaking of, you'll see another cover with Smokey Robinson coming out this afternoon is our Pittsburgh Current Holiday Cookbook. And we've got recipes from chefs around the area. Some staff members and other folks are sharing their favorite holiday recipes with you. There's even a cookie recipe from Allegheny County Chief Executive Rich Fitzgerald. So if that's not worth checking out, that's our online-only supplement. So check that out this afternoon. Our guest today has a lot to do, his organization, the Pittsburgh Post Gazette, has a lot to do with the Pittsburgh Current this week. Mike Fuoco is the president of the Pittsburgh News Guild, the Pittsburgh Post Gazette News Guild. He's a longtime staff writer there. And there have been a lot of issues at the Post Gazette regarding treatment of their employees, which we're going to get into. But for the past almost month, the News Guild members have been on a byline strike. They've been withholding their bylines from stories. So this week, the Pittsburgh Current decided that we would, in solidarity, to show our solidarity, we also held a byline strike. It was completely voluntary, and every one of our contributors went along with the strike. They pulled their bylines. Even those who, for example, everyone knows Dave Bracey writes our day drinking column, but Day also was involved in the byline strike, as was, everyone knows Rob Rogers draws Bruto and Grant. Rob was also involved. So it was definitely a sign to show that, I've always said that, we write about folks when there are issues or people are getting a raw deal, we write about them. Just because this is our industry doesn't mean that we should lay off anymore. So we did that, and we wanted to have Mike Fuoco. Good morning. Thanks for joining the Pittsburgh Current podcast.
Thanks for having me, Charlie. And I want to thank the staff of the Pittsburgh Current for showing such incredible solidarity with us in our struggle at the Pittsburgh Post Gazette. Yeah,
this is, look, nobody in our industry, it's never been easy. It's always, we face low pay, we face long hours. But what you guys have been experiencing at the Post Gazette, I can't even say for the last few months. I mean, it seems to have really ramped up in the last year, but you guys have gone almost 14 years without a raise, correct? And almost 3 years without a contract?
14 years without a raise this coming January 1st. 3 years without a contract this coming March 31st. And in addition to that, as if that's not enough,
right?
Those problems never had seeped into the newsroom.
Right.
And now we're fighting a battle on two fronts, both in negotiations and in the newsroom. In the last year, particularly in the last couple months, conditions in the newsroom have been intolerable. The cruelty that's been shown us for 14 years has now seeped into the newsroom. There's been retribution to union officials. Beloved managers have been forced out. People have been reassigned. People have been belittled by the executive editor, the new executive editor, Keith Burris. So it's become a toxic environment where it once was a safe haven where creativity, collegiality, and good-naturedness always was at the forefront. and it now is a very, very difficult place to work.
When I came to the city when I came to work in the city, I'm from the region, but when I came to the city to work in 2000, in Pittsburgh News Weekly, my goal was at some point to get to the Pittsburgh Post Gazette. That was a lot of writers in this town. The goal is sort of the top was to get to the Post Gazette, to kind of get into the union, to sort of get a job at a major newspaper. But I don't know anybody that's talking about that anymore who says that the Post Gazette is a place where they want to take their career, or I know some folks are still starting their career there, but it's not a place that people are looking at anymore because of the things we're going to talk about that have gone on.
I've been there for 35 years, and I started when I was 10. But I've been there for 35 years,
Yeah.
and for most of my tenure, it's just been a dream job. It's only within the last, 14 years ago, we wanted to help the Post Gazette. We gave up some of our salary. And then after a couple years, we started realizing that they were using this money to pay bonuses to each other.
Wow.
And we started going, wait a minute, there's something wrong with this picture. So we have not had a raise since 2006. And our buying power is 37% behind where it should be when you include the rate of inflation. So those of us who were there 14 years ago were making more money in 2006 than we are today. In addition to that, in these last negotiations, they have hired a known union-busting law firm from Tennessee to handle negotiations. Right. And their strategy, not just here, but at other newspapers, is to stall. And that, in their minds, I think it's a way to try to break the union. Obviously, that hasn't happened. Our byline strike has had 100% participation for nearly a month. We are very solid. But the other thing is, and the thing I think that the blocks who own the newspaper don't understand, is that the only one benefiting from 3 years of not moving the ball 1 inch is this law firm.
Right.
They make money by stalling. And, it's very clear to us. We're journalists. We can analyze things. Why the blocks can't see this. And the money they've spent on this law firm would have gotten a fair and equitable contract for all of us.
Yeah, it's obviously we don't need a year-by-year chronicle, but explain a little more about how you've seen the progression. I mean, like you said, you've been there 35 years. What's through that time, you've seen some changes. You've seen changes in newsroom leadership. You've seen changes at the very top as well. And I assume that a lot of what we're seeing now is because of changes when John Block took over as publisher, when when they brought in Keith Burris. But how have you seen the change over your 35 years? Has it been subtle, or has it been okay and then all at once just sort of slam?
No, it's been subtle. I worked under John Craig, who was an interesting and very talented editor, the late John Craig. I worked 15 years under David Shrivman, again, a talented editor. And David had the savvy and the wherewithal and the empathy with his staff to run interference for us when John Block, the publisher, would come up with crazy ideas for coverage or how to treat us. And it got to a point, and I think that we can date the problems at the Post Gazette back to January of 2018, when we ran a racist editorial called "Reason is Racism."
I was just looking that up so we could talk about it.
Yeah, and we broke the Newspaper Guild has been there 85 years. Right. We broke with tradition of those more than 8 decades, and we came out opposed to an editorial position in the Post Gazette. Right. In the past, we didn't always agree with our editorial positions, but that's where you have those kinds of things. But it's beyond the pale
Right.
Racism is beyond the pale, and we would not stand for that because it reflected on all of us. People don't understand the wall between the newsroom and the editorial department. Right. And we were not alone. Foundations, readers, civil rights groups all came out condemning it. Then it progressed, and so what happened was the person who wrote that editorial was the head of the editorial department in Toledo, Keith Burris.
Right.
So John Block's response to the pushback, even from his own family, was to promote Burris to be the editorial director of both the editorial department in Toledo, our sister paper, and in Pittsburgh.
Right.
Things continued going downhill to the point where David Shribman was forced out.
Right.
And after that, Burris was named as editor, despite the fact, executive editor, despite the fact that he had never run a newsroom or even had worked in news. He's always been an editorial writer. But we thought, okay, we'll give him a chance. And that happened earlier this year, and it's been nothing but chaos since then.
And to sort of go off what Mike was saying about the wall between editorial, news coverage and opinion writing, that's something that papers have tried to do for a long time. And at the Post Gazette, it was actually, you had Dave Shribman, who I believe worked, and I talked to Dave at the time when some of these things were coming out, and he very much tried to hold that line and hold that separation between himself and the editorial page, or the opinion section. But when Dave was forced out, I know I and a couple other reporters said, I didn't know at the time it was going to be Keith Burris, but my fear is that they weren't going to hire somebody who was as diligent a watchdog as Dave. And then to see Burris promoted was strange from the standpoint of, you want to keep that wall, but it wasn't strange from the standpoint of going back to the Reason is Racism editorial. Like you said, after that happened, everyone just came down on the Post Gazette, including the Block family, as you said, wrote a public letter kind of condemning it. And instead of taking that, John Robinson Block doubled down. And that kind of goes to what you've been talking about the intimidation and about the unwillingness to work with folks. I mean, when you're in that situation and it seems like at every turn, his goal has been to do something to, I don't know if it's to, inflame the public or inflame his newsroom, or I don't know, but a lot of his moves in the last few years, including going back to 2016 with the presidential election, he's made a lot of really strange moves that I think could be seen as not only changing the editorial direction of the paper, the opinion direction, the editorial page direction of the paper, but just it kind of goes to that whole sort of asserting yourself and trying to intimidate folks kind of thing.
Well, it's no secret that his hero is President Trump.
Absolutely. And
his actions mirror the kinds of things that Trump does. Creates chaos. And the one thing I forgot to mention was that he fired Rob Rogers, the award-winning, beloved editorial cartoonist, nationally renowned, because he was drawing what Burris and Block thought were anti-Trump cartoons, which is what his job is, to satirize what's in the news. So you have a really strange situation that occurs nowhere else in this country, where the executive editor is also the head of the editorial department. And that is a very, very dangerous and I feel unethical situation.
Right.
You cannot have the executive editor of a newspaper also determining the editorial, the direction of the editorials. Those two lines should not be crossed. And Burris has also done a very strange thing, which is that he's been micromanaging the newsroom.
Right.
Overriding middle managers. We all work for assistant managing editors. We get very close to them. They know what we do best. We share ideas. We talk about assignments. He has eliminated that and has been giving assignments, including to me, on things that he once covered. And it's just a very strange thing. It's not what the executive editor should be doing, which I think goes further showing that he's in over his head in this position.
Right. And you see those things at small town papers where it's 12,000 circulation and it's a very small newsroom, and but to run a major city's daily newspaper like that, it's baffling. But I understand from talking to folks that throughout the years, John Block has tried to keep his hand, I think, in the editorial coverage. I've been told by folks that he would occasionally try to hand out stories, and I know that there have been some stories I wrote about in the past. There seemed to be a spate of dog coverage, and some of them involved John Block's, people that worked for John Block or his dog and so forth. So just some of the, sort of these weird things, but it really didn't strike you as anything that's like, yeah, look, it's not something that most papers would do, but, it's harmless stuff. And then it really did seem to escalate, especially in 2016, where the photo of John Block on Donald Trump's private jet comes out during the campaign. And then there is, and correct me if I'm misrepresenting this, sources had told me that there was a very strong effort by Block to endorse Donald Trump, which would have been one of the only major newspapers to endorse Donald Trump. And instead we got sort of a lukewarm sort of non-endorsement endorsement. He's really sort of ramped up his effort to change the editorial page direction of the paper, which again shouldn't have anything to do with the newsroom, but it's still, obviously, I know that it rubs some of the employees the wrong way.
Absolutely. And, as you may know, we won a Pulitzer Prize this year.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
And on that very day, or in that very week, a board member of Block Communications, which owns the Post Gazette, and she happens to be the wife of Alan Block, who's the chairman,
right,
went on social media spreading anti-Muslim conspiracy theories about the fire at Notre Dame Cathedral.
Right.
On the very week that we are honored for, and the other thing about the Pulitzer is that John Block has never appeared in the newsroom to thank his staff, to appreciate that. And then the other thing is, you were talking about people wanting to work at the Post Gazette. Yeah. That's always been the case.
Sure.
People always try to flock to papers that win Pulitzer Prizes. It's the exact opposite at the Post Gazette. We have lost 20 really, really good staff members and 10 managers who have either been fired, forced out, or been offered buyouts to get out. And to lose 18% of our staff since January 1 is just incredible. So we don't have a flock of people trying to work at the Post Gazette.
Right.
We have a flock of people leaving because conditions are so horrible. And I think that really says something about how bad those conditions are.
It does. And that's actually, I was going to mention that, because it really it is when you see that, and when your hometown daily wins an award like that, you're just kind of like, holy cow, like they're really doing great things over there. I want to get there. But you have people going the other way, and that's just sort of, it's very strange. Although if you look at the situation, it's very understandable. But you mentioned that John Block had never come into the newsroom. Let's talk about when John Block did come into the newsroom earlier this year.
Yeah.
So we reported it, as well as other media outlets,
throughout the country.
Throughout the country, correct. There was on a Saturday evening, John Block came into the newsroom after he had been out at dinner, and he went on what can only be described very low key as a tirade, but it was even more than that. I mean, it was a very, very strange situation. Talk a little bit about that, and again, that also seems to be where this whole situation has been kicked up to the next level. Was the treatment by Block to the employees that night?
Sure. Well, a little bit of background.
Yeah.
For 2 years, at that point, the company has refused to pay increases in our healthcare premiums. That is under adjudication,
Right.
but that caused a cut in our healthcare coverage, which we feel is somewhat immoral. Because of that, after 2 years, we put a sign up on our union bulletin board
Right.
that read "Shame on the Blocks," which obviously infuriated John Block and other members of the Block family, but they're all complicit in this.
Sure.
I mean, you cut people's health care, you're messing with their lives. So on this, it was February 9th. I was off, and so it was John Silver, who is a unit chairman, and we both got frantic calls from the newsroom saying, you have to get down here.
Yeah.
And we didn't know what was going on. And apparently Block had come in with his teenage daughter. Some people described him as in an altered state. I can't swear to that, but he wasn't. He also was described as unhinged.
Right.
And he kept hitting our bulletin board with the sign "Shame on the Blocks" on it, screaming about it, saying that he was going to fire me, John Silver, Virginia Lynn, who was an editor, and Lillian Thomas. I will point out that Virginia Lynn was fired recently. I will point out that Lillian Thomas was basically forced out. John Silver has been reassigned to a beat that he did 20 years ago in his career. And I've been demoted from being an enterprise reporter to covering things that interns would be covering.
Right.
So to move on, he terrorized the 14 people who were working there that night. He also manhandled his daughter. He was screaming that he wanted a photograph of her and him standing in front of this sign. He got a he ordered a Post Gazette photographer who was working that night to take a picture. His daughter was crying, screaming, did not want to do this, was embarrassed, to the point where the then managing editor was summoned there, the head of HR was summoned, and John and I were summoned. And the end result was that he left. He was actually ordered out of the building by the HR director, who I will point out has recently been fired, and the managing editor, who I will point out has also left. We then, that was a Saturday night, our people were traumatized. We had them many of them took video. There were these photographs that showed how unhinged he was acting, and we had our guild members write contemporaneous notes of what had occurred. We went to the company on Monday. We said that we wanted him treated like any other person would be treated who acted like that, and they should not be allowed back into the building. If he's having some kind of mental health problem or whatever, he needs to be checked out before he's allowed back in the building. He didn't come back in for 3 days, but he did come back, and they wouldn't listen to us. In fact, they put out a false narrative that what we say happened didn't happen.
Right.
And we then were forced to put out the notes that were taken by our people. We filed an unfair labor practice for intimidation of union activities. That's still pending. And that was a beginning of a descent into a hostile work environment that, going back to his uncle, who was the publisher, the sainted Bill Block Sr., it's 180 degrees. Bill Block Sr. used to go down into the snack bar and sit with the pressmen covered in ink and, eat tomato soup with them.
Right.
John Block deigns not to even talk to us. In fact, he told his daughter that night, "You don't want to be like them. They're working class."
Right.
Well, you know what? I'm proud to be working class.
Yeah. He said, "You're a block. Don't you forget it. You're a block. You're not one of them." That's the quote from several witness
That's
reports.
exactly right.
That we reported. It was. And a lot of even in the middle of all of that, I know from talking, I've talked to numerous people who were there that night. They were more concerned, even more than themselves,
for
his daughter.
Absolutely,
right, that there was because
that
it was
their
such
first
a
concern.
situation, right?
That was their first concern, to get her, and actually, 2 of our members did get her to safety. I mean, it was, and so it did make national news. It was in the New York Times, Washington Post. It was all over the country because it's just such erratic behavior in such a. And, like I said, BCI tried to slough it off that we were making this up because of negotiations, and nothing could be farther from the truth. And truthfully, we had possession of those photographs.
Yeah.
We had possession of those videos. If, we could have released them.
Right.
But we are not going to do that to that child.
Yeah.
We wanted to show her more empathy and kindness and concern than her own father did.
And I'll say this, that throughout this whole thing, that when something happens, as a writer, a publisher who's been covering this story, when something happens, it's been very easy to find someone to confirm or to talk about things. But when we probably, like other media, we tried to get a hold of the video, we tried to get a hold of photos. No one was giving that stuff up. And that just shows that, again, because it wasn't about, at least it came off to me like it wasn't about trying to better the union's position that night. It was about, look, number one, we're worried about our work environment. And then, it was also the main concern, again, was Block's daughter, who shouldn't have been in that position in the first place.
It had absolutely nothing to do with negotiations.
Right.
It was totally separate. It had to do with that child's safety and the hostility and the interference in union activities. I will say that one person who was working that night suffered such PTSD that he ended up leaving. He's a veteran. He was a veteran who had worked there for, I think, 10 years. Before that, had worked at another newspaper for 10 or 15 years. He was so traumatized by that he had to leave, and he left without a job.
Right. Wow. And that's and I was going to say that most reporters who've been around, they've been doing this a long time. We've seen a lot of stuff. Like, it's pretty hard to shake a reporter, because the things that we've covered, from horrible accidents to homicides and different things like that, and we've seen a lot of stuff. So it takes a bit to shake a reporter, and for something like that to shake a reporter, it had to be a pretty intense situation.
And the other thing I will point out, and that's exactly, you're absolutely right, Charlie. But the other thing I'll point out is these contemporaneous notes that were taken by journalists,
right?
Whose job is
right.
to observe and report
Yeah.
in a fair and accurate manner,
Right.
and they did that. And to a person, they all confirmed each other. They all did them individually, but when you looked at them, they were all confirming, and so that began a really bad downward spiral, and it was shortly after that Burroughs was named
Correct.
as executive editor, and it almost was that he was appointed to be where Shrivman was a buffer between us and John Block. It was as if Burroughs was appointed to be John Block's buffer against our reaction to his erratic behavior.
Yeah. Some media have called him a lapdog. I won't mention any names. It was me. But it really does. That's what it seems like. And one thing so you mentioned about yourself being trans. You and Jonathan haven't been the only reporters the only writers who've been moved off of beats. And so I want to ask you, it seems like, so there's especially when Rob Rogers was fired, a lot of people talked about dumping their subscriptions, and some people did. And so then there's that philosophical reason that you want to say, politically, I don't agree with Block and Burr, so I'm going to get rid of my subscription. But when you look at moves like that, so full disclosure, I've known Rich Lord for probably close to 20 years. Rich Lord is one of my favorite reporters, one of my favorite writers nationally. Forget about anything else. But if you look on Rich's Twitter, his Twitter bio says, Q1 2019, acting city editor. Q4 2019, acting city hall reporter. Warning, do not try this career path at home. But that's sort of, so now when people are looking at what's happening, they're not only affecting the opinion side by taking a reporter like yourself, like Rich Sword, like John Silver, and putting them on beats. Not that they're meaningless beats, but that any number of starting reporters could do. I mean, Rich started at the Post Gazette as a City Hall reporter. And so you're now talking about potentially damaging the product. That has to be worrisome. At least that's my observation.
It is worrisome, and that is part of the environment of fear and intimidation and retribution that we're working under. The other day, a really great guy, he's our handyman. He's, he came to me and he said, he goes, things are bad, aren't they? And I said, yeah. I said, well, but why do you say that? He goes, when I walk in the newsroom, I can just feel it.
Yeah.
And, that's not somebody who's in there a lot.
Right.
And I got to tell you, I mean, the loss of people, both managers who we loved working with, and our coworkers on the staff. I mean, we truly feel that we are fighting for the soul of the Post Gazette. We love the Post Gazette. I've spent more than half of my life there. I've devoted myself. We see what we do as a calling, and to see them, intentionally or not, destroy what we all love is just so hurtful. We feel that we have an obligation to this community and to our readers. And I must say that despite the conditions that we're working under, despite the fact that we have not been appreciated, treated with dignity or economic justice for 14 years, every person I work with still does their job as if we were paid a king's ransom.
Right.
We don't do it for the money. We never would have gotten into this profession. It's a calling. We believe in that we are that democracy depends upon journalism, that we have a responsibility to our community, and that we will write the first draft of history in a fair and accurate manner so that our neighbors, our friends, and our community are informed. And we continue to do that under very, very stressful situation, both economically and in a work environment that is at times very frightening, but always very stressful. You're always looking over your shoulder. Is today the day I'm going to be reassigned to something even worse than I've been reassigned to?
Right. And so I was going to ask you what the response would be to a reader who asked you why they shouldn't cancel their subscription. And I think what you said sort of trust the reporters, or trust the staff, the newsroom staff, that they're going to continue to give you a quality product. Because I mean, obviously you can't afford to lose readers en masse.
That's right.
So is that sort of the message you give them?
We I don't have it on today, but we have buttons that we wear that says no PG without me.
Right.
But, when I look at the number of bylines that have been withheld during these 23 days, it's close to 1,200. It's so obvious to me, and it should be to everyone else, who is the Post Gazette?
Yeah.
It's the staff of the Post Gazette. It's not the multi-million-dollar owners. It's not Keith Burris creating an atmosphere of fear and intimidation. It is the journalists, the photographers, the reporters, the columnists, the artists, the page designers. We care. And so I would say to somebody, why shouldn't I cancel my subscription? That would be my answer, is because you have journalists who care about truth, about democracy, and about an informed electorate and an informed community. We're going to continue doing that until they do something like lock us out or try to fire all of us. Even under these conditions, we're going to do what we feel is our calling. And if you don't like the editorial page, just skip past it.
Right.
Because you're going to find fair and accurate reporting, wonderful informative graphics, incredible photographs, wonderful page designs. Despite the loss of 20 very talented people, we have 139 really talented people who remain there, and our commitment is unflagging.
Mike, what kind of insight can you give me? You mentioned earlier about some longtime managers being pushed out and forced out. I've read some things. I think you've had it in a couple of press releases. You mentioned a Hunger Games type situation, or I don't want to say you exactly, but some folks have mentioned that it was like a Hunger Games situation. What was that process what does that mean? And what was that process as far as you understand it, if you could talk about it?
The way I understood it, and obviously they don't call me into these meetings.
Sure.
But they decided, and I think they knew what the end result was going to be before they did it. They decided that they were going to get rid of 2 positions in middle management. So there were 5 people. Mm-hmm. They made them reapply for their jobs, interview with Burris to make their case, and interestingly enough, and I don't think coincidentally, Virginia Lynn was let go, and she was one that Block said he wanted fired. Lillian Thomas was forced out to the benefit of the Houston Chronicle. She's now going to be an investigative editor there.
Yeah.
And Matt Smith, longtime editor, also was let go because he stood up to Burris, and Burris wanted a story that really ethically we shouldn't be doing, and Matt told him so, and now Matt's gone. Those 3 people had more than 90 years service to the Pittsburgh Post Gazette. The institutional knowledge that left with them, the institutional knowledge that leaves with anybody who leaves there, being forced out by somebody who's barely been there for a cup of coffee is atrocious, and it's just it just shows that the care for the legacy, the 233-year-old legacy of the Post Gazette. I mean, my God, we reported on the passage of the U.S. Constitution. We're the oldest newspaper west of the Alleghenies, and it should be treated with respect. And the owners don't do that. Burris isn't doing that. It's left to us, staff members under siege, to do that. And we're going to continue to do that as long as we're standing.
Right. So we'll kind of wrap today talking a little bit about what's to come. But I think it's important to point out that while a lot of attention is given to what's happening in the newsroom to editorial employees, this is a company-wide, these cuts and different things that are happening to people is happening on a company-wide basis. Earlier this year, in fact, the Blocks announced that they were going to lay off 30 employees, 30 a part of the Teamsters Union, and that includes the press room, the mail room, distribution as well.
No, the 30 they were talking about were primarily truck drivers. Delivering the newspapers, and ostensibly they were doing that because they cut back from 5 days printing to 3 days printing.
And then they were going to cut 40 more employees to part-time, which included they would lose their health benefits, which are already...
That's why they were doing it.
Right, exactly, which is already...
There's no moral compass guiding any of this.
Right.
And if I can interrupt you.
No, please.
These are employees who have devoted 25, 30, 35, 40 years of service to the Post Gazette. And their repayment is, we're going to get rid of your health care benefits.
Right.
Or we're going to get rid of your jobs.
And so the union filed a stay, or asked a federal judge to delay the action, and in fact,
injunction.
An injunction, right? And right before Thanksgiving, the day before Thanksgiving, federal judge, issued that injunction. Do you know, your knowledge? I mean, and he ordered those workers to be called back to work, correct?
Yes.
And have they been, as far as you know?
As far as I know, they have not been. So now there may be a contempt of court. Right. The people that they were going to slash their health care benefits, in just such a cruel way. I mean, it's just incredible. Around at any time, but around the holidays anyway, they still have their health care. But to my knowledge, and it might have changed by today, they had not acted on the judge's order in calling those other people back. So there may be a contempt of court decision coming down.
Yeah, and the PG is, we should say the PG is appealing that. So we'll certainly keep you up to date on that, as I'm sure the Guild will as well. So, Mike, just here in the final minutes, so what happens from here? I mean, because are there negotiations going on? I mean, are we just going to see just sort of a string of sort of aggressive actions and then the union sort of the union response? Is that how does that not become life at the Pittsburgh Post Gazette from here out? I mean, what has to happen, especially in a case where you don't seem to have management that's willing to come to the table? And I've talked to Joe Pass, who is the the attorney for the Teamsters Union. At least I know he's the Teamsters lawyer,
And us.
and yeah, in the newsroom place. And he says he's never dealt with. He's told me several times he's never, in all of his years doing this, he's never dealt with a company so unwilling to find a resolution of some kind. But so how does it go? Because it seems like this kind of thing can't sustain forever. But when you look at a solution coming down the pike, there doesn't seem to be.
Well, the center won't hold, and
Yeah.
I agree that we're I think we're past the point of critical mass.
Right.
I think that something is going to happen in 2020. I don't think that this can go on much longer. Our hope is that the blocks come to the realization that the law firm they have hired and have been paying millions of dollars for the last 3 years with nothing to show for it is a total waste of money and is an impediment. The only person who is benefiting from this turmoil is the attorney,
Right.
who is causing much of it. They're a negotiator. So no one would ever accuse me of being Pollyanna, but I really do believe that we are going to prevail. I think the way that that's going to happen, once they realize that law firm has to go, and they either bring in another law firm or they do it themselves.
Yeah.
But if they did that, I know we will reach an accord. This law firm came in with 100 changes to a contract that we've had for 85 years. Normally, they might request 4 or 5 changes.
Right.
So when you come in with 100, you know you're not going to get you're not trying to get a contract. You're not looking for a solution. You're looking for a problem, and
Right.
that's why we're in Vietnam right now.
Mike Fuoco, hopefully we can airlift you guys out of there at some point soon. It's,
Withdrawal with honor. Yeah.
Exactly. Thank you for joining me today, Mike. I really appreciate it, and keep following the Pittsburgh Current. You know, we're going to be covering this as well as other media. I mean, it's sometimes I think for media to cover media, but that's kind of what alts like us and my old place, the Pittsburgh City Paper, that's what we're here for, to cover these stories that dailies necessarily don't cover, and you won't necessarily cover yourself. So that's what we're here for, and I know that both papers will be covering this through till some sort of resolution. So definitely check with that, and check. Do you guys have does the Guild have a social media or website? Or
It's
people can check.
our website is pghguild.com, and I think we're Twitter is at PG News Guild.
Correct. Yeah.
And I can't remember what the Facebook is.
Yeah, I think if you search PG News Guild on
Yeah.
Facebook, you'll find them as well.
And I will point out that
Yeah.
continuing our struggle, we're doing it on several fronts, not just
Right.
the byline strike,
Sure.
social media, leafleting, and we're going to be out in force on Saturday when the Democratic candidates come to the convention center. There's going to be over 1,000 people there, and we're going to be leafleting and spreading the word of our struggle and asking people who want a free press and who want to support us to email the blocks and Burris and tell them that this type of anti-union activity is not welcome in the birthplace of unionism.
Fantastic. Mike Fuoco, thank you very much. Thank you guys very much. Two quick announcements. You can find the last print issue of the year of the Pittsburgh Current is on stands now. We will be out on January 31st will be our next issue. Will be an online-only issue simply because, as being in this business a long time, those aren't the best pickup days. So, but we'll have our year in review online, and then we will be back in print on January 14th. So check us out. Check us out online. And Mike Fuoco, thank you very much, and have a great week.
Thank you.
And entertainment that comes in all sources. Pittsburgh, a better alternative. Giving Pittsburgh a better alternative. Giving Pittsburgh a better alternative. Giving Pittsburgh a better alternative.